Dragon Ball Super has a huge villain problem. And before you call me an idiot, I'm not thinking with a Dragon Ball Z is better than Dragon Ball Super because I grew up with it mentality. This is actually a structural problem that Dragon Ball Super has. If your villains aren't intimidating, if they aren't actually villains, and if they aren't really memorable, the entire story loses its tension. By the end of this video, I'm gonna show you why Dragon Ball Super's villain issue is probably the biggest reason the series feels weaker than Dragon Ball Z. And trust me, you're gonna want to stick all the way to the end. The Dragon Ball Super villains aren't scary. Think back to Dragon Ball Z for 1 second. Frieza is an over-galactic lord that kills for fun. Cell was absorbing people in cities like they were snacks. And while Buu was a goofball, he was so powerful, it was intimidating. There was fear. There was consequences. There was actual dread. But in Dragon Ball Super, Beerus becomes a grumpy babysitter. Hits feels like he becomes a training partner. Jiren, for the most part, is just quiet and doesn't really feel like he wants to be there. And Broly is basically a part of the family now. Even Frieza, who was scary in Dragon Ball Z, is softened up for us to not be as scared of him in Dragon Ball Super. Dragon Ball Super rarely lets its villains feel very dangerous for that long. The arcs either soften them or they become literal allies. And without that fear factor, the stakes just feel so low. I can't be the only one that thinks that. Most of the Dragon Ball Super villains don't even stay villains. This one annoys me. Like, literally, Beerus becomes a part of the team. Hit ends up just being hired to kill Goku by Goku, so again, like a training partner. Broly, who was this menacing, horrible being in Dragon Ball Z, is this soft guy with daddy issues in Dragon Ball Super. And although Frieza may not fully be an ally, they embarrass the man over and over to the point of where he doesn't even feel like a threat. The only true villain Dragon Ball Super actually committed to was Goku Black and Zamasu. And if you notice, the Goku Black arc is many of people's favorites because he actually stood for something. He didn't have a redemption arc. He didn't have any friends. He just wanted to eradicate the mortals. And that's a conflict. But with the others, Dragon Ball Super keeps blurring the lines between villain and rival. And while rivals are fun and great, they don't create a sense of dread or terror. When everyone ends up being all buddy-buddy together, the threat overall just feels smaller. A good way to put it is Dragon Ball Z had enemies. Dragon Ball Super feels like they have co-workers. This last reason might be a hot take, but I agree with it. Dragon Ball Super's villains are nowhere near as iconic as Dragon Ball Z's. Frieza, Cell, Majin Buu, those designs, those villains are burned into anime history. I literally have a cell phone case. Now ask yourself, does Jiren hold that legacy? Does Hit? Does Beerus? Does anyone from Dragon Ball Super besides Goku Black and maybe Zamasu? Personally, I've never seen anyone with a Jiren phone case. And there's a reason Dragon Ball Super keeps spamming Frieza. He works, he's iconic, he's recognizable, he does numbers, but when the series has to ultimately keep going back to a villain created in the 90s, that tells you something. Instead of trying to create the next legendary villain, they just keep recycling the previous one. That's not an evolution of the series, that's just depending on nostalgia, basically. Now, in all fairness, Dragon Ball Super does have some great concepts. Zamasu is one of my favorite written villains of all time. The multiple universes actually has great potential to show us some crazy villains. And although Broly didn't end up being the crazy villain that we wanted, he's still a great character. But despite all of this, the hype moments and the power levels did go up, but the villain presence and overall intimidation went down. And that is a core issue. Dragon Ball Super doesn't feel worse because it lacks action. It feels worse because the villains don't feel dangerous. They don't even stay villains, and they just haven't left the cultural impact that the Dragon Ball Z villains did. When antagonists aren't even scary, transformations feel pointless and cosmetic, victories feel like they don't even matter, and the story just feels lighter overall. And really, it's a bigger problem than people like to admit. But hey, that's just my take. Do you think Dragon Ball Super actually has a villain problem, or do you like them? Let me know down below in the comments. I read and react to every single one. And click the video on the screen right now of 5 reasons why the Dragon Ball Super remake is a bad idea. Because although they may be able to polish the series, they can't fix the villains that we were given. Like and subscribe for more Dragon Ball Z hot takes.